All right. Welcome to the Modern Thought Room. My name is Jethro, and this I'm very excited about. I'm very excited about talking about context and how, with a slight adjustment, you can stop playing the fool, right? And what I mean by that is, have you had a moment where somebody one upped you in context and you felt silly, right? That's happened to me more than I would like to admit, but each time it's happened, it's reminded me that in this psychological, intellectual jousting that folks be doing in professional settings, sometimes is just a change in speaking to context that makes the difference in what your contribution means, right? So this happens, and I'm pretty sure this is not a unique experience, right? You go and you make a point, you want to contribute, you want to add value, all the good things. And part of what you say is missing another layer of context that somebody comes in, and it's the worst when it's your superior. Spirit comes in and says, "Oh, well, nah, that's not a real concern because of XYZ." Now, I have a, in my, like being in education, that type of background, and even in being in research, for me, I want to chime back with like, well, all right, buddy, we can go to another context and I can prove you wrong. But in professional context, politics sometimes make it so that you don't necessarily want to win every encounter where somebody does this kind of one upping in context. People socially do this too, and it's obnoxious, right? You got a thing that you're proud of. So you mention, oh yeah, this happened to me, and the person says, oh well, I just, and then they 10x you, right? And that's just like bringing the context to another place that then makes your contribution small. Now, all of this again is in the main kind of conversation, but understanding this is like the main conversation, understanding that sometimes this is good. And I think this is one of the this is a parenthetical now. This is one of the things that I think a lot of people misunderstand in professional settings is that something could be good and it's useful for helping us be efficient and productive, but still have long-term consequences that slight adjustments could help reduce, right? So this conversation we're going to have about context is one of those things. A superior, somebody else, one ups you with context in one, ideally, this is ideal, ideally because they're about protecting the good of the group, right? If you've seen the movie Ants, for the good of the colony, that's like one of my favorite movies. Side note, but that's their purpose, right? That's in a good situation, that's their purpose. In a bad situation, it's just to make you look small. But we're not going to necessarily deal with that because that's out of, what I've gotten prepared for us to talk about now. I'm not looking into that. But this is ideally in situation, they're still just trying to protect the integrity of whatever thing, your team is working towards, right? And that's valid. But context is really a race to it, right? It's really a race to it. How early you start thinking about the context is very important. Now, we're going to get into a place where we talk about the difference between when you're in service of a client and when you're in service of your own vision. Your own vision may still be for clients or potential customers, but that's different than when you're doing something in service to a client, right? Or for a client. All right. So again, if you're tired of looking dumb because somebody one upped you in context, stay tuned. And if you're tired of teammates kind of poking holes in the contributions or points you're making, stay tuned because ultimately shifts in your understanding of context, taking the time to write out, scope out context before you enter any type of deliberation, team meeting, brainstorming, ideation, what have you, can help you make an impact that will ultimately be for the good of the group. Now, excuse me, some of my tone with some things is gonna sound like, maybe I'm trying to help people, defend themselves and all these. Part of that is true, yes. But when a group has people that are performing at their best and that are strong, confident, and competitive to a degree, the group usually does better. And that's why there are teams, people say, oh, I don't know if this team, in a sports context, oh, I don't know if this team will be able to work with all these superstars. And go watch out, they start balling out, and everybody's like, yeah, of course it makes sense. They're all really highly motivated, talented people, right? So it can go either way. We're not going to focus on the downside. We're just going to think about, all right, how do I, as an individual that's part of a collective, step up so that in me understanding and recognizing context more accurately and earlier and sooner will ultimately help what I can contribute, help improve what I can contribute to the collective body and ultimately move us forward, right? And then hopefully you get a kickback from it. And by kickback, I mean there's some type of, you know, encouragement, monetary outcome that helps you kind of keep moving forward and staying on your front foot so that you can always be a strong teammate, a strong individual, what have you. All right. So um context setting is a simple adjustment that will move you and your team in the right direction. All right. So context setting. So you have a team meeting call, maybe in person, maybe virtual. In a sports context, I always kind of lean on sports context because I think the coach in a sports context does a lot more than we understand. And I really think that if some corporate teams, professional teams were to study um, sports coaches, they would learn a lot about how to get the most out of their employees, and their employees would want to be competitive over time, right? So I think and I have a soccer background, so I'll always kind of dip into that because I think it's just very clear, right? And if your company, your team, your organization isn't studying coaches, guys probably should, right? So find talented coaches, professional coaches, collegiate coaches, travel coaches, local rec coaches, depending on scale of your business, and really sit with them and maybe have them walk through the different things that they're going through to get the most out of their players so that you can then take some of those concepts and frameworks and move it and apply it to your professional or corporate setting. All right. Very important plug for my sports coaches out there. All right. So this rush, right, to provide context, right, is very important. So how do you do it? Simply start early, right? Get your objectives outlined. Get an understanding of what this is. Okay. Something that people don't necessarily say out loud, right? When you're going into a call team is whoever's leading the call, unless they're like next level, they're not necessarily telling everybody what their role is, right? There's an implied understanding of who can contribute what in these calls. And it's a mysterious kind of implied thing that we all just like accept. As an individual, though, if you want to shine, if you want to ball out in some of these calls, what you have to really do is like already have not just the main business objective contextualized, but then you want to have the context of all of the parties that are in the call. Not groundbreaking of a point. This is not a groundbreaking point, right? But it is way easier and something that happens more often to forget or to neglect doing that, and also to fall into the trap of I already know XYZ about the people in this call, and these are their tendencies. Tendencies and context aren't necessarily synonymous in these types of situations. So just because you know the tendencies of folks that you're going to be working with does not rewrite, right, or rescript the context that you're going to be engaging with them and what you need to bring forward in the right context. That is what's key, is making sure, right, that the context that you're applying all of every, like when I say every single line, there's not a sentence that you should drop that should be out of context, right? People with authority in those types of settings, they could drop sentences out of context as much as they want. And unless they are, open to correction, open to people, bringing them back on focus, sometimes you just gotta let that rock, and that's just the nature of things. I wouldn't want that to be my team, but hey, what happens for you guys, that's what you guys, decide to rock with. But for the most part, you want to stick to the context, which keeps things a bit more objective than moving all the way into the subjective. Even though I kind of alluded to some of those more subjective things being very important too. They all are. Life's difficult. I understand. All right. So teams should always be supportively building context, because that is what not only mitigates risk but also keeps opportunity in frame. Once again, teams should always be supportively building context, because that is what not only mitigates risk but also keeps opportunity in frame, right? If 5 people go into a call, one person's leading, one person's taking notes, what are these other 3 folks doing, right? What are these other 3 folks doing? You can decide. If you're one of the 3 individuals, you could have brainstormed a contribution that you wanted to bring in. You could have had a series of key data points that you want to contribute so that you guys can move forward in confidence. Or if you're the leader, you could even assign roles, or you can encourage some type of sharing behavior. All right. So the team, though, those 5, everyone is supposed to still be protecting the collective objective. Why? So that we do not go askew, right? So that the leader that's power drunk in the moment, they had a weak moment, lost the plot, it's their way or the highway, so that they don't sabotage themselves and you care about them because you're their teammate, right? So you say, hey, isn't this, and people love doing this kind of like subtle, I'm being polite, hey, didn't we actually want to do this? Or, oh, I thought you said this in the email. Oh, I thought you said this on the call last time. And I'm not here to like boo-hoo on that, because hey, that's somebody that's being courageous and they're making an effort to, hey, let me throw this on your radar. You catch it, cool. You don't, all right. But my job is to make sure, I probably shouldn't have touched the mic. What? My job is to make sure that we at least aren't going into situations blind. All right. So the team is building context together, and everyone has a role in bringing the context together. Depending on how you lead or how the team's configured, how big the team is, that could be even something that's assigned. Those are roles that could be assigned, or that could just be a general culture that is developed. All right. So mitigating risk is a big thing. And what does that mean? Is like, hey, let's keep our eyes on the prize. And when we see we're going too far adrift, we can kind of rein it back in. People love reining stuff back in. But here's the flip side to that. The flip side to the reining stuff in part is then what can happen is, if the person that's taking notes isn't, doing a thorough job, if the team's culture is to meet an objective and move on, and not necessarily value the other learnings that came from this endeavor, if that's the culture, then yeah, you'll always be leaking and losing opportunities for innovation and contributions. That will always happen. So not only are you guys, doing this context setting to mitigate risk, but you're also doing it to identify opportunity. Opportunity doesn't need to, you don't need to strike opportunity in that moment. And this is something that's it's a sad thing, and this sounds dramatic, but it burdens my heart when I see just like very good moments where opportunity has been identified, and now it just hasn't been relegated to a secondary or tertiary type of task. It's thrown into the abyss. It's put in a place where you probably might not get back to it for another year, definitely not another quarter. If you had a objective in Q1, you met that main objective, but out of it came 3 or 4 additional learnings that you couldn't necessarily act on. If your team is consistently keeping track of those additional learnings and then acting on them later on, that's beautiful. But if they're not, that's probably a little bit more likely, right? They're not, and then fast forward next year, hey, maybe one of those things comes back up, and then we address it then, and that's fine. Everybody has different scales and things like that that they're working with, and how much they can attack at one time.